I'm the current chairman of the Planning Commission. Ann Johnson, a fellow commissioner, and I have been appointed to a subcommittee to work with Greg Vail and his firm, Selva Partners, on an update of a document, number of documents that deal with landscape design in the city of Laguna Beach. And the objective of our efforts is to take those documents and transform them into an element of our general plan. And so in starting that effort and the process of taking public input into the landscape update, we worked with Greg and his team, Ann Christoph and Bob Borthwick, and we thought a good way to start that would be our event tonight, which is a forum of 6 experts, and you're going to meet all of these folks tonight. I've gotten a little preview of their presentations because each one of them has something different to tell us. I think it's going to be very informative, and really the objective tonight is to inform and inspire our work in updating our landscape element for the 21st century. So I'm not going to take any more thunder from you, Greg, because I know you have a number of introductory comments. You're going to introduce our panel. So welcome. Thank you for coming. And come back at the end of the month because there's going to be a second meeting, and that date is October 29th. But Greg will tell you a little more about that. So thanks again for coming. Greg?
I've got this here. Yep. Good evening, everyone. I'm Greg Vail. Welcome to the first of 2 Landscape and Scenic Highways Element Forums, here hosted cordially by the Planning Commission. Tonight, what we want to do is to inspire and enlighten you about all things landscape in Laguna. And what we're hoping is to elevate this to a higher and a broader level so that after you've finished here tonight, you may have taken away some new ideas, some things you haven't thought about before. Now, to get to that point, our panelists, our 6 panelists who are behind me here, I'll introduce them to you shortly. Ann Christoph, Bob Borthwick, a project manager, city project manager, Belinda and Dinas, and Commissioners Zersmead and Ann Johnson, who's not here this evening, have prepared a 2-hour program for you tonight, half presentation and half discussion on a very, very wide range of landscape topics, things you may not have even thought were landscape before. So our panelists, and here are their names here, and I'll talk about them later, are going to share their insights with you on everything from geology to biology to fire safety to urban design and sustainability. We're going to start with basics of the landscape, and we're going to run that all the way through some very, very cutting-edge ideas on sustainability, which I think you will find most intriguing. And there are some things that we're learning that I think are going to challenge some of the established conventional wisdom. So, along with what we're doing here tonight, we have another forum of this sort on October 29th, which will be your chance to talk to us about what you think needs to go into the element, and hopefully it will be based on some of the insights you may have gained here tonight. We have a dedicated web page on the city's website, lagunabeachcity.net/LSHE. We've prepared an online survey which we would invite you and hope that you will take so that you can also tell us in another way what you're looking to see in the element. And then, of course, if you have questions or comments and you want to talk to a real person, call Belinda and Dinas, the project manager, or send her an email, bdinas@lagunabeachcity.net. So what our task here is in this next month is to take the very cursory 1975 Laguna Beach Scenic Highways element, which frankly, we didn't even know existed. It was that small when we first started. And the 1995 Landscape and Scenic Highways Research Document, which is just the opposite of the Scenic Highways element, and meld those together into a new element of the general plan for landscape and scenic highways, accompanied by a update to the resource document, which was prepared in 1995. What I'm going to do is now take you into a series of elements about the landscape element. We're going to go into geology, landscape art history, habitat management, fire safety, sustainability, and urban design. Where am I here? All right. So this is all a guide for the next 20 years. These are the topics that we're going to be going into. And now I want to talk just a little bit about the basics of what is a general plan. As I think you all know, each jurisdiction in California must adopt a general plan as its guiding charter or its constitution. The state provides guidance for that, as well as some very specific guidance on scenic highways. Now, general plans have different elements in every city and every county. In this case, as you can see on the screen, Laguna Beach has 9 of those elements, including what we're doing now. And these basically outline the city's long-term vision and for the future, in this case for the next 20 years, and includes a series of often lengthy to-do lists implementing action. So what do we think is going to end up in the landscape element? First of all, there are really 4 different components here. The landscape element is a community design document that really includes everything about our community except for infrastructure, traffic circulation, and pure architecture. It will have chapters on the context in which we're working in, a series of issues, statements, and analysis, and then there will be a chapter with the policies that grow out of those contexts and issue statements and short, medium, and long-term implementation. And it will contain a scenic highways component of some sort that will cast the future of Coast Highway, Laguna Canyon Road, and El Toro Road. Now, behind the element, there are three big ideas or 3 organizing concepts. The first, and this is the biggest idea, is integrated landscape management. And what that is, in a nutshell, is taking the principles of ecology and sustainable development and melding those together into a cohesive, coordinated landscape planning document. The second is neighborhood descriptions and neighborhood character, where we will be recognizing the 13 distinct areas of Laguna Beach and the 38 neighborhoods that were first described in the 1995 resource document, as you can see on the map here. And it also includes, and this is important, our native open space, our coastline, and our parks. So it's comprehensive. And finally, the third item is public safety, fire safety and management, landform stability, pedestrian circulation. So why do we need this? Well, I think we all agree in this room and everywhere that Laguna Beach's landscape is a world-renowned treasure. It informs our community and cultural identity, and it's absolutely critical to our well-being. So the whole purpose of this element is to protect Laguna for present and future generations, in this case of this document for the next 20 years. Last but not least, we need it because the land use element has a policy that requires it be prepared. So then, aside from the element, what is the Landscape and Scenic Highways resource document? Not the element, but the detailed document that was done in 1996 and is going to be updated now. This will contain a whole series of different detailed topics, sustainability strategies, updated neighborhood descriptions, scenic highway programs, plant lists, street tree programs, heritage tree lists, and so on so on and so forth. You've seen it before. It'll be updated and broadened for the next round. So when is all this going to be done? We're here right now, as you see in the orange circle on the left-hand side, October 3rd, our first open house forum. Second forum where you'll have a chance to talk is October 29th. And then after that, between November and January, we will be working with staff to complete the draft element, at which time that will come forth to the commission and the public for review. Two hearings are planned, with the element then going to the city council probably the first half of 2014 for refinement and ultimate action. And you can just see how this works here. So once again, contact and comment. Come to the next workshop on the 29th here at 7 o'clock. Take our online survey. Go onto the website. Contact Belinda. Now I'd like to introduce our expert panelists. We have, for geology, we have Jamie Fink. For art and history, we have Eric Jessen, who will be with us just for a short period since he's under the weather. Chris Smith, who's a biologist. For habitat, Rick Halsey, who's a fire safety expert. Bob Perry, who's sustainability and native plant materials, and Steve Killenberg, who is an urban designer. Thank you. I'm now going to turn it over to Jamie for geology. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jamie Fink, and I'm a senior geologist here in Laguna Beach. I work at Coastal Geotechnical, and it's right downtown. I've been here for 16 years, and this is, though I don't live here, this is my home. So I'm really happy to be a part of this tonight. I only have a short time to talk about the geology of Laguna Beach, which started about 20 million years ago, so I better get a move on. Oops, wrong slides. That's all right, I can wing it. Okay, the San Joaquin Hills, which is, the dominant feature here in Laguna Beach. They extend from Newport Bay down to about the Salt Creek area and go about 3 to 4 miles inland. And they separate the Orange County area, what used to be our agricultural center. And this is where these are. The peak of these mountains, the San Joaquin Mountains, lies in Laguna Beach at the area known as Top of the World. So approximately 20 million years ago, this whole city was underwater. So it really wasn't a city, but it was underwater, and it was the deposition of, we have two dominant bedrocks here in Laguna Beach. We have the Topanga Formation and the San Onofre Breccia. The Topanga Formation has a lot of marine fossils. That's the picture here. It was deposited about 20 million years ago, and it's mainly consists of sandstone with thin interbedded siltstones. And the Topanga Formation, it underlies Temple Hills, Bluebird Canyon, and Laguna Canyon. When you drive down Laguna Canyon, all the bedrock that you see consists of the Topanga Formation. The hillsides associated with this rock type are moderately steep. There are some steep ones, but they're moderate, and it comprises most of our ancient landslides that have happened in the area. The San Onofre Breccia is our second dominant rock type, and it's also in the middle Miocene, so about 15 million years ago. And that formation was deposited, which is really cool as a geologist, as underwater debris, landslides, and mudslides. So these humongous, like 20, 30-mile long landslides happen and form this rock here. It's pretty awesome from my point of view. This rock can be observed. It's along the steep bluffs and hillsides in Diamond Crest View, Nye Place, and in South Laguna. The San Onofre Breccia is typically more steep than the Topanga sandstone, and it is a little more stable. It doesn't have the weak bedrock plains that the Topanga sandstone has. in late Miocene, so like 5 or 10 million years, we've moved up like 10 million years, we see the deposition of more marine sediments called the Monterey Formation, and those are the cliffs that are exposed along Crystal Cove. At the same time, we got volcanic intrusions, and those are the rocks we see at Abalone Point, which is pictured here, and Two Rock Point, and the infamous Seal Rock off Crescent Bay. Those are all comprised of our igneous rocks. Regional tectonics, which is now we're at 2 to 6 million years ago, occurred in North America. So we had the major rip-off of Baja from mainland Mexico. The Rocky Mountains were being uplifted, the Colorado Plateau, and at the same time, our area was being faulted, folded, and uplifted. This right here is a picture of our Topanga sandstone, and you can see like offset in the beds and how they're tilted. So that's really one of the main features that causes our hillside issues here in Laguna are these thin gray little beds when they get wet and they're tilting downhill. That's what gets weak and goes. So the Pleistocene, so now we're at about 2 million years to 17,000 years. It's characterized by episodes of glaciation every about 100,000 years or so. So these, we call it rapid in geology terms, but these rapid events caused extreme climate changes, which caused worldwide sea levels to rise and lower, and led to the deposition of our marine and non-marine terrace deposits, which are the like broad flat line where like Glenary Street lies. Those are all our marine terraces. Kind of in North Laguna here, we have, well, it's relatively level compared to the rest of it. So those are our marine terraces. Our San Joaquin Hills are thought to have last uplifted during this time, and the reason we know that is because all the way at Del Mar Street and Archbeats Heights and in Top of the World, we find some of these marine terraces, which is pretty awesome too. So our canyons, the continual uplift and emergence of our San Joaquin Hills, coupled with the natural erosion processes and the big rainfalls, caused our major canyons here. We have lots of smaller canyons, but our major canyons are Laguna Canyon and Aliso Canyon. Laguna Canyons has the sandstone boulders, the caves, the cliffs, and they provide habitats for California's sycamores, coast live oaks, and coastal sagebrush vegetation. Aliso Canyon's faulted history exposes both rock types. We have the Topanga Formation and the San Onofre breccia. Most of our ancient landslides were formed during this time as well, about 10,000 to 20,000 years ago, when we had abundant rainfall, much lower sea level, and so we had these significant erosions which caused steep cliffs in our canyons, and the rainfall triggered these big landslides. Okay, we can't discuss the geology of Laguna Beach without mentioning some of the potential risks and hazards that we have living in such a beautiful scenic area. We need to understand the geologic hazards of living within the relatively steep hillsides and along canyon bottoms. So we have active fault zones around us that would affect us are the Newport-Inglewood Fault, and it's located only a couple of miles offshore. We have the San Joaquin Hills Blind Thrust, which is below us, about 3.5 miles. We've got the Palos Verdes Fault, which is about 15 miles offshore. And we've got the Elsinore Fault, which is about 20 miles inland. Everyone's heard of the San Andreas Fault. That's about 55 miles inland. We're also all too familiar with the landslides and mud flows that happen in Laguna Beach. Our 1938, 1969, 1997, and 98 mud flows in and around Laguna Canyon were all triggered from significant rainfall periods. the reactivation of numerous landslides in the area, which comprise the 1978 Bluebird Canyon landslide, the 1980 Del Mar landslide, the 1993 Buena Vista landslide, and the 1995 Dunning Drive landslide were all old landslides that were reactivated. Our 1993 Mystic Hills landslide and the most recent Bluebird Canyon landslide were triggered by subsurface water. We don't really, I mean, they think it's, it's rainfall, but that wasn't a significant rainfall period, but we just build up this water and we have these beds that dip out a slope. And we also have ancient faults that I showed you in some of the pictures there that can kind of control where those are. Oh, that's my part.
All right. Thank you, Jamie. Eric, you just went around the corner, and Mr. Jessen, Eric is going to speak about the emergence and the evolution of the Laguna landscape as seen through artists. This is going to be eye candy. Eric, thank you.
Okie dokie. Let's see what we do here. Space bar, huh? Okay. Good evening. We just heard about how Laguna's landscape came to be in geologic terms. And now I'm going to talk about the significance of that landscape for the artists who came here in the early 20th century. Now, what was so special about Laguna's landscape that enticed these plein air artists to come here and build Laguna's worldwide reputation as an art colony? They came not just to paint pretty pictures, but to experience and express their beliefs on canvas about the spirituality of nature. That sounds really kind of hokey pokey in today's modern terms, but back in the early 20th century, that was pretty vogue, whether it was at Lake Tahoe or Santa Barbara or Laguna Beach. Laguna's isolation, its inspiring landscapes, and its rustic conditions allowed a connection with nature that became imbued in the artist's work. And this also is a brief summary of how Laguna's landscaping developed, as evidenced in the pictorial record contained in some of the early plein air canvases painted here in town. Because through the paintings of these early artists, we can experience the striking Laguna landscape that they found and how Laguna's landscape developed over time. At first glance, you might think, these are just a bunch of pictures looking into the past. But they're not. They're looking into the future. By depicting the vegetation that existed and was being planted throughout town, the paintings are showing us man's efforts to make this place beautiful and more habitable. They're showing us their hopes and dreams for Laguna's remarkable landscape. The first image is a painting titled Bluebird Canyon, Laguna Beach, by William Lees Judson, the co-founder with Norman St. Clair of the entire plein air arts movement. Judson was also the founding dean of the School of Fine Arts and Architecture at USC. And this canvas depicts substantial landscape elements that recur in the paintings of Laguna's plein air artists. We can see colorful hillsides, and an abundance of oaks and sycamores and willows threading their way down Bluebird Creek. There are remnants of these species in any number of the 35 creeks and arroyos that punctuate the Laguna coastal shelf and predate the first homesteaders in town. The first imported species were largely dictated by the plant palette of the California missions. Here we see a couple of examples, namely the California pepper, which is actually from Brazil, and the Mexican fan palm over here, in this painting by Joseph Kleitsch. The Mission Fathers brought the first exotic plant palette to California, including the signature species of Canary Island date palm, Mexican fan palm, California pepper, olive, and other fruit trees that sprung from the mission sites to colonize places like Laguna Beach. We still have them all over town. The next wave of exotic species importation came with ship trading and whaling operations in the 1860s and 70s that brought additional species to Laguna like the eucalyptus, the Monterey cypress and pine, the Italian stone pine and cypress, and the Pittosporum Victoria box, for example. How these plants started to colonize our town are depicted in the remaining paintings that I will show you. This is Kleitch's Hotel Laguna, one of the first two main gathering places in town and the birthplace of our arts colony, because as many of you know, the original gallery was right next door to the hotel, encircled by eucalyptus to provide shade and ambience for the hotel. And here's a photograph of that same spot. And here's the other main gathering spot, Ish's general store and post office. And a photograph. And so, our village and urban forest begins to emerge. I also want to stress that Laguna's urban forest isn't entirely man-planted. There is also a lot of natural plant dispersal and migration of exotic and native species that goes on in town, aided by fallen seeds, root sprouts, seed transport by flood siltation, birds, and other animals. Let's look downtown first. This canvas shows the emergence of Monterey cypress, right there, and eucalyptus that started being spread around California after ship trading and whaling commenced. Another angle from the east end of Heisler Park, we can see a substantial swath of trees with smaller paintings emerging further upslope in this painting by Clarence Hinkle. Here we see downtown with established trees along Coast Boulevard and the emergence of same along Lower Cliff Drive up in this area and up as far as High Drive in the distance. And from a nearby vantage point, near the waterfront along El Paseo, with the freshly graded pad for the new Hotel Laguna. Kleitch was a realist. He didn't paint anything. He didn't exercise artistic license. He painted what he saw. The old hotel was torn down in 1929. The site was graded down flat, and that's the pad for the new hotel you're looking at right there. Café Las Ondas by Kleitch, we can see the Heisler Tommy Bahama building right here on the right, and the landscape is maturing and sheltering the buildings looking up Laguna Avenue towards Park Avenue. Stepping a little further back from downtown, a view near Through and Legion Street. So we're up on Legion, and the cross street would be Through Street. That's the original St. Joseph's Catholic Church right there. Later became Kleitch's home and studio when St. Catherine's was built. A view from my garden by Kleitch, and from the intimacy of his own garden on the coastal shelf immediately east of downtown. And this view near the current high school shows how mature groves are integrated with the village and the hillside landscape. In this case, this is at Park Avenue and Bent Street. That apartment building is still standing. And then, going up as far as Pine Castle, or where Pine Castle was later built, we can see new plantings along Monterey, plantings occurring along Monterey and North Laguna, and along Hawthorne and Myrtle Streets, with substantial growth developing as far away as Woods Cove, down in here, and even further beyond in Victoria Beach. The painters appreciated how the cottages and paintings and plantings visually enriched the coastal landscape. And we jump down south along the Rockledge Moss Point area. Now this canvas nicely depicts the rich topography that lends itself to the weaving vegetation lines of Laguna that result from the combination of 35 creeks punctuating the coastal shelf, such as this depression for Rockledge Creek right here. The backdrop of steep hillsides and deep canyons, and the coastal bluffs and the beaches themselves. And then let's take a look at a neighborhood tract, in this case, lower Three Arch Bay. What we're really seeing here is man's instinct to plant around the home and along the streets and in the parks to create ambience, a sense of place, cool shade, wind protection, and good old-fashioned slope and soil stabilization. Given these vegetation functions, I think that's why William Wendt, the most famous and granddaddy of all the Laguna artists, titled this painting, Trees, They Are My Friends. Now this sampling of paintings clearly suggests what drew the artists and others here. They loved the landscape they found, and they appreciated the village that developed as more planting was added to blend with the urban with nature. What resulted was a mix of trees and shrubbery of various ages, intermingled with diverse buildings. Our community landscape, while much more urbanized than the early artists ever dreamt, still has a mystique, a softness, a feeling of random creative energy, and a beauty that attracts appreciative visitors and inspires today's artists and residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Now it's time to hear about habitat management from biologist Trish Smith.
Thank you. It's nice to be here tonight. My day job is an ecologist with the Nature Conservancy, and I get to work all throughout Southern California. I've lived in Laguna Beach for 16 years now, just like Jamie, and I love it here, and I love the natural communities that surround us. It's very inspiring to me, and I love to get out into it and hike, particularly. So I'm going to be talking about the management of our natural communities. A lot has changed since the early 20th century. Laguna doesn't quite look like it did back then, and we've actually lost a lot of our natural communities with the urbanization of the city. But thanks to the efforts of its citizens, including Jim Dilley, who forged the Laguna Greenbelt movement, we have protected significant areas of natural habitat within the city's boundaries, and we have a lot to be proud of. To understand the importance of our natural communities, it helps kind of just step back and look at the global perspective. Southern California in particular has been identified by many conservation groups as a biological hotspot. Areas containing, there are like 26 of them throughout the world, and these are areas that contain tremendous biological diversity in terms of genes, numbers of plants and animals, genetic diversity, and the like. Southern California in particular is a biological hotspot because here we have the convergence of desert, montane, and coastal influences all converging in one location, creating very unique plant and animal assemblages that aren't found anywhere else in the world. Southern California is also one of 5 Mediterranean climate regions of the world. And what's interesting about this is that these regions, all 5 of them, only make up 2% of the world's land area, but contain 20% of the world's plant diversity. So what's the challenge? Why is this important? It's important because here in Laguna Beach, we've protected really pretty high-quality natural open space lands, and we have the challenge and the responsibility to protect these lands into the future so that they maintain their biological diversity for future generations. So what are the natural communities of Laguna Beach? Natural communities are plants, animals, and the associations they form, and the natural and physical processes that drive them. And we've got 3 main habitat types or natural communities here in Laguna Beach. There's several more, but I'm only going to talk about the top 3. They are in the lower left corner, Is that right? Coastal sage scrub. In the upper left corner, chaparral, and the lower right corner, riparian or streamside woodlands. Oh, I have to go back. Coastal sage scrub is probably our most dominant plant community, and it's found on the Topanga Sandstone Formation that Jamie spoke of. Really sandy soils, well-draining soils, and this particular plant community is very diverse and changes according to slope or aspect. It is an aromatic plant community. When you walk through it, you come home with the smell of sage on your pants and your shirt. And it's semi-woody and it's drought deciduous. It loses its leaves during the summertime in response to lack of water. However, it starts putting those leaves on immediately when the winter rains or fall rains come. This is a plant community that has been a major focus of regional conservation efforts in Southern California for the last 20 years. Supports in Southern California over 100 rare or sensitive plant and animal species. The chaparral community up in the upper left corner is the most dominant community found in all of California. But here in Laguna Beach, we have several subtypes of chaparral, the most unique being southern maritime chaparral, which is a globally rare habitat type, only found in a few locations between here and Baja. Unlike coastal sage scrub, it stays green year-round, but it is too drought adapted, and it's found on the San Onofre Breccia Formation that Jamie mentioned. So these plant communities are definitely tied to the geology and soils and slope and aspect and distance to the coast. Southern maritime chaparral is particularly unique in that it stays green all year round, but sometimes when we get great rainfall years, it actually has a cast of white in the wintertime when the California lilac blooms, and sometimes it seems like it's glowing in the dark at night if it really gets a good bloom year. The last community I'm going to talk about is our streamside or riparian woodlands, and the most dominant ones that we think about are Aliso Creek and Laguna Creek. And these are dominated, as Jamie mentioned, by willows, sycamores, and coast live oaks. Probably our oldest trees in Laguna are those oaks that we find, or those sycamores that we find in Laguna and Aliso canyons. They're just, that's the place to find the oldest trees. They've been there for eons, several hundred years at least. So all of these plant communities, both independently and together, support an array of both common and sensitive plant and wildlife species. I won't go into all of them, but the thing that's notable is that in Laguna Beach, we have 2 endangered plant species where they're found nowhere else in the world but Laguna Beach. And that would be in the lower right corner, the Laguna Beach Live Forever, and the one above it, the big crown. Why am I having a big leaf crown beard? Having a brain fade there for a minute. And we have some pretty unique plant communities in our city, as well as some endangered ones that are found nowhere else in the world. So what are the benefits of our natural communities? I think you could probably think of many. They provide us a lot of benefits. They help filter runoff and erosion. They contain rainfall. They abate the urban heat island effect by having that mass of green behind us and around us. They provide recreational opportunities, and our natural communities also help define Laguna Beach. They form a green belt, as Jim Dilley hoped to have established, a green belt around our community that separate us from cities like Laguna Niguel or Aliso Viejo or Newport Coast, and they really pull out Laguna as a distinct community with a buffer of green belt around it. So I was asked to talk about how do we manage these open space lands, and I was talking to Rick about it, and we said, these are the open space lands that we do have are of high quality, and the best thing we could do is not touch them. But there are opportunities for us to help these natural communities in certain instances, particularly where they interface with the urban development. And the biggest concern about our open spaces is the invasion of non-native plant species. We have non-native plant species that have originated from other Mediterranean regions of the world that do really great here, and they tend to choke out our native habitat and cause, on occasion, even a fire hazard. And these exotic or invasive plant species are not well adapted to our wildlife are not well adapted to these invasive plant species. Some of the dominant ones, the bamboo-like plant is actually giant reed. It's not a bamboo, and you'll find a lot of it in Laguna Canyon Creek and Aliso Creek. It actually chokes water flows and becomes a fire hazard in the fall when it dries up. Laguna Canyon Foundation is taking on a big effort to control it in Aliso Creek, which is an amazing effort. Everybody always wanted it to happen. It's finally occurring. Then we have pampas grass up in the Upper left corner, fennel below it, and then garland chrysanthemum to the right. We also have fountain grass, which is a problem. And all of these plant species have been identified by the City of Laguna Beach as invasive plants of concern, which eventually will be targeted for control. And the thing is, you got to stay on top of them. You think you get rid of them, you left a few behind, they'll come right back and invade again. So you really have to be diligent with these really invasive plants. Another thing we can do to help our habitat or open space or natural communities is to restore those lands that have been degraded by historic human uses. There have been several restoration projects in the canyon by the city, Laguna Canyon Foundation, and the Greater Laguna Fire Safe Council to restore native habitat in lands that have been degraded by historic practices. We have the restoration project that's just been started at Big Bend by Laguna Canyon Foundation. The Greater Fire Safe Council did a nice fire safe garden and coastal sage scrub restoration right there at the corner of El Toro and Laguna Canyon Road. And there's been efforts at the dog park to restore riparian woodlands. So there have been efforts, and there are actually more opportunities to do more of the same throughout the city. We also can encourage the incorporation of our locally native plants in our urban and residential gardens. There are a lot of California native plants that are in our own hillsides that do quite well in gardens, are quite adaptable. They don't need much water. They don't require a lot of fertilizer or pesticides, so they help with maintenance. And they also are great in that they attract our California native birds and butterflies, which is, of course, a great thing to add to your garden. We also have opportunities to kind of improve the way we manage the urban edge. We have lots of tools to manage the urban edge in the name of fire safety, goats, manual thinning, fire safe gardens like was done in the canyon. But it's using the right tool for the right instance and maybe modifying those practices where there are sensitive habitat types. Goat grazing perhaps is a great tool to use in really degraded lands that don't support much in the way of native habitat. But in some instances, it might be better to use manual thinning or to reduce the intensity of the grazing so that some native shrubs with deep roots can remain to provide wildlife habitat as well as erosion control. Fire safe gardens are another opportunity where there's irrigation next to urban development. You can incorporate native plants as well as Mediterranean plants that are, California friendly into the landscape that are fire safe and do a gradual thinning from there to retain a lot of our native plant species. And lastly, I think there's opportunities to have a win-win situation, like the slope behind City Hall is pretty denuded. After the Laguna fire, a lot of habitat was lost, and then there was goat grazing. And it used to be a really important prime location for our coastal cactus wren, a native bird species that's been lost to many areas in Southern California due to intense wildfires. There is an opportunity to perhaps intensify cactus, planting of prickly pear cactus on that slope to help control erosion and to perhaps enhance habitat for the coastal cactus wren, which is still found in Laguna Canyon and could find its way down here back to Laguna Beach if we just give it a chance. So that's it.
Trish, thank you very much. I think, as you can tell, we have something of a university-level undergrad and postgrad course going on here. So there's a lot to cover, and we're running a little bit behind. I don't want to cramp anybody's style, but I'd like to introduce Rick Halsey, who's going to talk to you about fire.
So I'll just start a little differently. I was in bed with my wife the other night, and I knew I was going to push the wrong button. We were talking about things, you know how you do when you're in bed. And she was saying all of a sudden that her mother was donating her organ to the church. And I thought, really? Which one? And you know how husbands do, they sort of listen with half ears. And she says, well, the only one she's got. Okay, now I'm a biologist, and sometimes my wife and I, we don't really mesh in that scientific realm. And I go, well, what do you mean which organ is she donating? And she says, the only one. I said, first of all, the woman's 85 years old. Why is she donating her organ? And she says, what do you mean her organ? It doesn't matter how old she is. I said, certainly it does. When a woman's that old, she's not going to want to give up her organ. She says, of course she wants to give up her organ. Well, what's happening? I've got this paradigm, right? I'm thinking about biology. She's thinking about her mother's, organ, right? I have no clue. So what I want to sort of introduce here is we've got to get out of our boxes and our preordained, senses of how things are and really start listening to other people, listening. And what happens is it's fascinating what you can learn. And I since learned the organ was donated properly, so everything's fine. So in terms of wildfire, there's a lot of misconceptions. And if you forget anything tonight, of course you won't forget the story about her mother's organ. But the issue is, when you want to protect homes and communities, you want to start from the house and you want to work out. What's sort of the general idea that people do now based on this phraseology? Where do they start? Out, and then in. What are you trying to protect? The house, your life. Where do you want to start then? With your life and the house. And once you go out further and further and further, you get diminishing returns. And so the idea of fire safety is you want to start at the asset you want to protect, and then you go out further. Because the further you go away, the less benefit there is, and also the increasing negative benefits. So I just want to point out this little house there on the corner. This guy, the homeowners association there in Scripps Ranch, required everybody to have shake shingle roofs. And this guy was the only guy that decided he wanted to change out. Well, after 2 years of legal hassling, he finally got it changed out. 2 months later, the Cedar Fire hit in 2003. His house is the only one left basically standing there. And it was primarily because, and there it is in the upper left-hand corner, it was because of the shake shingle roofing. And so they learned it the hard way. We don't have to. I don't know how many shake shingle roofs there are in Laguna Beach. Is that an issue here anymore, or has that been taken care of? Okay. So the issue with the roofing and all of that really has to do with embers. This is how homes get taken out. It's not flames touching homes. It's not fireballs and fire tornadoes that people imagine. It's embers that can travel up to 2 miles away. So you have two options. You can create communities that are fire safe and fire resilient, or you can pave out 4 or 5 miles beyond your house and have a parking lot. That's not really an option, because we enjoy the beautiful open space like Trish was talking about. So you want to protect that. So how do you protect that and keep your community safe? Well, you take care of these little buggers. So in all the research, and I don't want to go to this in great detail, but basically what you're looking at here is in the studies we've done so far, really it's grasses that are the things that are causing homes to burn in a lot of instances, and what are coming up in areas that are cleared up from native shrubs. It's basically grasses, non-native weeds. And wind-blown embers in the Witch Creek fire that was in down in San Diego County in 2007, virtually every home that got burned, it was about 1,200 homes, were burned by embers, some of which traveled a mile away. And so you have the fire front, a mile and a half or so away, and houses start burning. What's going on? Well, the embers landed on the junk in the yard, on the roofs and the gutters and that kind of thing. So it's not the native landscape that's having the issue. It's the construction of the homes themselves. And then we also found out that, essentially beyond about 50 to 100 feet of clearance, and I don't really like to use that word, but beyond that, there's not much point, because that's the zone where you want to make sure you have a fire-safe environment. I'll give you a little graphic here, and this sort of shows you what's going on. You have our eucalyptus and oak trees on the right, in this house there, and the fire comes. And people imagine these walls of fire, right? Coming down these 200-foot walls of fire, and the media loves to talk about this. And the wind starts blowing what? These little embers, right? And the embers, did you see what just happened? What caught one of those embers? The tree, okay? And then it gets in the attic, and you take your house out. After the 2007 Witch Creek fire in my neighborhood, about a month afterwards, people were cutting down 200-year-old oak trees because they were told they had to clear around their property. These oak trees are what saved the homes. They created heat sinks and ember catchers. And so if you create a properly landscaped, well-maintained yard with shrubs and things, you're creating a sponge to protect your house from the embers. This is in Santa Barbara, and I just want to give you an example of what urban vegetation can do in terms of fire risk. That's not an accent light. That's a little ember that got hit into this in the T fire, which I think was 2008 or so. And all of a sudden it started igniting homes around this particular area. We have an ignition problem. The fire has ignited the computer. What happened, Greg? while we're waiting, anybody have any questions about what I've talked about so far? As far as not lawn, green grass. I'm talking non-native weeds. So oftentimes, and I have a picture coming up here.
Do you want to reset this?
What happens is, some people will clear because it says, the codes say clearance, right? So if they're near native vegetation, people will go out and just bulldoze or whatever, and then the year, Margaret forgets to call the goat people or Bob forgets to start doing weeding, you've got this foot and a half on the weeds, and those are more flammable actually. So that's what I'm what do you think? What degree are you Yeah, actually, Orange County Fire is pretty on the ball in terms of how they recommend these. There's always room for improvement, but since Orange County actually, when I come from an area where there is no actually Orange County has been evidenced by a lot of that. But again, you've got this wildland interface, you've heard of that before? The WUI, that's the zone you want to work. You've got these beautiful landscapes like Trish was talking about. And it's not a fire hazard, it's a natural resource.
Well, the computer is giving you a chance to talk, which you weren't supposed to have until October 29th. So this is a bonus for you while Belinda's getting it cranked up again. This is an important topic, so I'm going to break the protocol a little bit, and if some other people have some questions, that's fine. Or we'll just take hopefully a 2-minute break here, and you can continue.
Okay, want me to stop then?
If there's questions, please let's go ahead.
And they bring you to a job on the hill. And then you don't go back, and whatever shows up is very flammable as opposed to the native habitat, which was better than the overgrazing.
Yeah, I just want to stress, the issue is if you have a landscape that's properly irrigated and see, if you ever put a styrofoam cup in a fireplace with water in it, you know what happens? Nothing. It won't melt. Now think about a styrofoam cup for a minute, would you? It only will melt when all the water is taken out. Same thing with native plants. You can just lightly irrigate these things, and they have so much moisture in them, and they're easily irrigated compared to, cultivars and things. They actually can create that, barrier. Okay,
All right, Rick, you're on.
Sorry. So it's the urban fuels that are important. And these are things we have to look at because they're often responsible for taking out homes. So when you get situations where people are panicking about fire, you get this kind of a thing. And it doesn't make any sense. And here's actually the state law that we helped amend. And I just want you to look at the last paragraph there, last sentence. Actually the second sentence there. The amount of fuel modification necessary shall take into account the flammability of the structure. If you have a fire-safe home, the local district really ought to look at that and say, well, we require 200 feet for everybody, except you, because you can have 25 feet because your house is made out of metal or something. And so if you work with your local district and go and create a relationship, you can really create a dynamic, very effective fire policy. And I just wanted to bring in Pompeii here. I don't know if you know, we were talking about goats. One of the reasons the Mediterranean systems collapsed was because of overgrazing. And I'm not saying this is Pompeii here, but the issue is that when you do things that modify the landscape, such as this is a goat grazed landscape, and eventually what happened was it got saturated and started having landfall issues. So you got to look at the long-term consequences, not 3 weeks out. And so when you want to use goats, like Trish said, on degraded landscapes that are already kind of whacked, and there are weeds everywhere, okay, but you don't want to put them in landscapes like this that are really pristine. And leave that stuff alone and do it manually. It's really the best, most effective way. And here's a situation. They tried to protect this little plant here, with this 225-foot clearance. That got, taken out by an ember. So I'm just explaining to you what we really need to look at. Look at the science, what actually happens, rather than what you think is going to happen. And here's some places in Laguna that I took a look at a few years ago. And what you've got here, you've got a tinderbox house. That's the fuel. That's the problem. It's not the vegetation around it. That's the problem. And so you got to address that. Otherwise, everything else you do is pretty useless in the long-term perspective. And just really quickly, here's a house that didn't burn down in the 2007 Witch Creek Fire. I just want to tell you why. There's this zone 1 here, which you want to make sure there's no flammable material. That's usually about 30 feet or so. And then you have around the house some ember catchers, and you notice some of these are eucalyptus. So there's a lot of mythology about ukes and trees in general. If they're properly maintained, and this includes pine trees, and you take care of them, they actually can protect your home. The problem is some people get sloppy and they don't. And so you get a lot of litter. That's an issue. But essentially, if they're properly maintained, they become heat sinks and ember catchers like I talked about earlier. And then you got to make sure that you get a vent up there that doesn't suck in embers. And they have these ember-resistant vents now that can actually retard ember intrusion. So just really quickly here, the most effective way to live safely with fire is trying to adapt to nature rather than trying to force nature to adapt to us, because we're going to lose if we try to do that. So basically you got location that's important, you've got the building design, and you have fuel management, and fuel management includes the playhouse, the wooden fence, the stack of wood, everything, not just the plants. So, thank you.
Bravo, Rick. Now to Professor Bob Perry, who taught me just about everything I know about native plants some years ago.
Thank you, Greg. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm going to keep turning the focus now from the history and the evolution of a natural landscape and then the occupation of that land on a scale where the intervention and impact seem to be subservient to the natural systems, and all the way up now to hearing what Rick is talking about of conflicts between the urban environment and the natural landscape. And my topic is to really look at the sustainability issue regarding our landscapes and try to bring some metric to our efforts to quantify and look at sustainability in more than an emotional way, and to bring that into a very complicated situation here where we want to embrace the value of our history, the natural flora and fauna that's here, and to devise ways to protect the scenic beauty as well as provide fire safety. All sorts of things are converging here. And where I'm going to go is to talk about looking at the fact that we have continued to populate our land and to bring in more and more of a built environment into relationship with the natural environment. And we're doing so by using vast amounts of resources and energy in particular. And I do want to bring attention to energy more than any other resource. It relates to everything else we do, and I believe lies at the foundation of the issue of environmental sustainability. So with that, this is an energy model that I'm talking about and trying to provide to you just a very basic summary of a very complex issue. And in this case here, start off with a very academic and boring definition and saying that the sustainable landscape is one where there's a balance here between the productivity of the plants or the vegetation you are managing, preserving, introducing, and growing with the types of resources and particularly energies you invest in doing all of that work. And if it is as straightforward as saying we're growing a crop and that crop has an energy value built into its biomass, and we can measure and assess that energy value, we do not want to invest more energy than the product we're producing is able to accrue over an indefinite period of time. And this is in essence what we're not doing on this planet today when we do look at our consumption of fossil fuels, that we are using fossil fuels at an alarming rate with many consequences, but in essence we're dealing with an energy imbalance, that all of the things we produce, all of the amenities we create, and how we live today requires phenomenal amounts of energy. And when we look at how we can balance it and accrue it, a lot of attention comes back to our landscapes. So with that, would like to, and just make sure I didn't point out a couple of basic things, and this is a test for your eyesight tonight, so I'll summarize these points here. The living plant communities on this planet are what provide the biological foundation for life, and they do this in a very basic way. They harvest sunlight energy, convert it into chemical energy. We call that biomass. For every 1 pound of biomass, there's enough energy in that to sustain each of us for 1 day. There's about 2,000 kilocalories of energy in a pound of biomass, regardless of the plant type that has produced it. That 1 pound of biomass, as it grows and is accumulated, releases a pound of free oxygen into the atmosphere, and 4/10 of a pound, or I round it off to half a pound, of carbon is sequestered from the atmosphere. So we have this relationship, and would like to just go into a little bit further. I checked on my smartphone today what the population of Laguna Beach was and discovered it's about 24,000 people. That means for us to sustain ourselves, we need to consume 24,000 pounds of biomass a day, and in the process of consuming that and using it and sustaining the energy needs of our body, we need to consume 24,000 pounds of oxygen from the atmosphere. And so as a plant grows, produces its pound of energy containing biomass, it has released the pound of oxygen. I come along, I gobble up that pound of organic cereal, and it's all from seeds and leaves of plants, and I get my daily energy intake. I need to breathe in the oxygen that was released during that cycle of growth to get the energy released back into my system. And then I complete the cycle by exhaling carbon dioxide, and believe it or not, a half a pound of carbon leaves my body in the form of carbon dioxide. So this is a very simple relationship between plants and our survival, and we have, in addition to that direct association there, been able to understand that during the Carboniferous age, some 350 million to 300 million years ago, phenomenal amounts of carbon from biomass was sequestered in the surface of our planet and has become our oil, coal, natural gas reserves that are essentially carbon deposits. So we look at this and we say that in terms of landscape value, and would add to Chris's definition to the biodiversity and the wildlife benefits, it has a fundamental benefit of sequestering energy, releasing oxygen, storing carbon, and providing the energy foundation for life on the planet. And that's what's going on, and it's the most fundamental benefit. So that's what I like to focus on. So we move past that, and we do say we can look at the different types of energies we use, and we're really focused on biological energy, carbon-based energy, or fossil fuel, all terms for the same carbon type of energy. So we look at this, and we discover that there is energy that we use to provide water to our landscapes. We produce a lot of products that we use in our landscapes, from herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers, other types of soil amendments. And then we go into using fuel energy by the gallons, tens of thousands of gallons, that are just very common practices today. And what we don't really realize is just how intense these energy products are and how much we are consuming beyond what the landscape is able to sequester or produce. So I'm looking at a specific case study here and can say that if we took an acre of turf grass, and just look at the grass for a moment, we love the turf grass in our parks, we like them in many other settings as well, you can actually weigh the biomass of that turf grass and discover how much energy is in it, how much oxygen has been produced, and how much carbon has been stored within the tissue. And then you can look at the energy costs or the use of that energy to provide water, fertilizer, mowing, and service vehicles. We're just looking at 4 variables here. We're not talking about grading the soil. We're not talking about trenching and putting in irrigation lines. We're not talking about a lot of other energy inputs. It's just after the landscape's in, let's see what we do each year to sustain this turf grass. And when you do the math and use some of the values, the way of quantifying and looking and comparing the benefits to the costs, we discover minimally within 3.5 years, the maintenance that we invest in our landscapes exceeds the lifetime environmental, carbon storage, oxygen production, energy embodied benefits of the turf. It just disappears quickly, and for the next 47 years of this 50-year-old turf grass plot, we are consuming the energy resources, the oxygen, and releasing the carbon into the environment at an alarming rate. So we're finally getting a metric to quantify and compare, measure the biomass, weigh it, translate that into an energy value, and look at the energies we use of an equal type, a carbon-based fossil fuel energy source, and see what we're producing versus what we're spending. And we can discover in that process just how upside down all of our landscapes are. And based on just that general summary, I can say that I have not yet seen a sustainable human landscape. We have not achieved it. We are so far away that you take some now quantitative data to try to evaluate, compare, and come up with a way of really establishing what you're doing, and we're not there yet. We're way far away. So I take that and I move away from turf grass as another example and show you a coastal hillside in Laguna and find that we're not mowing this. We're not watering nearly as much. We don't have to drive our service vehicles weekly to get our equipment to the lawns to mow them. And we're not working with fertilizers. We're using mulch and natural practices. And the energy inputs are greatly reduced. And so much so that this landscape is, quote, sustainable for about 30 years because it produces biomass, it has its accrued energy, it's stored carbon, it's released oxygen, and that has paid for 30 years of our maintenance practices of bringing water, periodically raking and cleaning and deadheading, and driving our service vehicles on a lower order of magnitude. In this point, it's to say very clearly that whatever we can do in our landscape practices to reduce our use of energy for different purposes is the real target of a lot of ordinances, I feel, and guidelines to assist us in doing things in a more sustainable way. So I come to a checklist of things that we suggest that do lead to this, and let me just skip forward. I can see that my second presentation didn't get here tonight. So I'm going to have to modify things, excuse me, and conclude with saying that, yes, working with native and adapted plants in your environment is really desirable because it's a first step towards plants that can fit in, grow, adapt, and not need so many subsidies of either water or fertilizer or other types of human intervention. I really enjoyed looking at Eric's plein air images where we saw the introduction of exotic species, and I know I didn't see irrigation systems there, and I didn't see a lot of other horticultural practices, and I did see a lot of large and diverse plant species showing that this is a mecca, this is a wonderful environment in which many plants would enjoy living. And simply introducing them, on one hand, can give you diversity, on another hand, create issues of invasive species and tough issues to reconcile. Nevertheless, we do look for plants that come from Mediterranean coastal habitat climate types. We, in my view, should be planting for optimum levels of biomass. And that does say that if you look at the sage scrub, it is a drought-adapted plant community living in essentially the driest portions of our environment, and it only produces a certain amount of biomass. You can add more benefit to your landscapes by having trees and shrubs, some of which can be native, some of which can be adapted, and the idea is you're trying to have a more abundant landscape productivity versus keeping things cropped to the level of turf grass as the other extreme. Designed to capture and infiltrate rainfall. I had a case study here to show you in Moreno Valley where we have 10 inches of rainfall. It's the next step towards Palm Springs and Coachella Valley, so it's very arid, very dry. We are doing landscaping without irrigation systems, and we are avoiding the use of the embedded energy in all the plastic pipe and all of the operational energy to bring water to that region and to irrigate plants. You can do it with the right species, with rainfall harvesting, seasonal water, seasonal drought, and emulate what nature has displayed and demonstrated as a successful strategy in many, many dry climate zones. And then reduce the activities that use fossil fuels. Every gallon of gasoline, I think I use 2 gallons of gasoline getting from Claremont. I must admit I'm not a Laguna Beach resident, but driving from the Inland Valley down here using 2 gallons of gasoline, that's the equivalent of 32 pounds of biomass. So I use 32 pounds of oxygen and the energy that's contained in the equivalent of 32 pounds of wood, and that's what got me down to Laguna Beach tonight to speak to you. When we think of our service vehicles driving all around our cities to mow lawns and to attend to our landscape care, it's phenomenal. If you could eliminate the lawns and reduce service vehicle movement to once every 2 weeks to your parks and landscapes, you've just made a quantum leap forward, a huge, huge leap forward. And instead of driving to the store 5 times each day, you do it 1 time on a personal level. You again are doing very meaningful things to try to conserve energy and work towards sustainability. And then finally, improve soil through a variety of practices. We need to avoid using synthesized nitrogen-based fertilizers that overstimulate our plants, cause greater demand for water, and the synthesis of nitrogen by the burning of natural gas to produce and isolate the nitrogen is so phenomenally expensive. We're finally deciding that we may have to legislate that that has to stop. We discovered this during World War II for horrible reasons. We applied those ideas to agriculture, found the benefit of nitrogen in our landscapes that stimulates growth, but it's excessive growth, particularly in ornamental gardens, and we need to get back to living on the land, nurturing the soil in a much more organic and natural way. And the last thought would be, if you have good soil, you're going to have a great garden. It's not the other way around. So I like what Rick said. Think about what you really want to have and where do you start with, and you start with that soil. And you get the foundation there, you get it receptive to receiving rainfall and exchange of nutrients in ways that really enables diverse, abundant, and healthy growth. Thank you very much.
Bob, thank you. I do apologize that the second half of your presentation somehow got lost, but we want to invite you back.
The 29th?
Whenever you want.
Okay.
Thank you. Steve Kellenberg, urban designer.
Good evening, everybody. Steve Kellenberg, urban planner, lived in Laguna Beach for, it's hard to believe, 32 years now. And most of that time I've spent not so much working for any particular city, but working as a consultant doing new community design in the southwestern United States and Asia, South America, Middle East, and just recently landed a job a little bit closer to home where I don't have to travel as much. But I always, during all those travels, I always came back to Laguna Beach. And Greg, gave me 3 questions that I'm going to kind of use to organize my thoughts. And the first one was, what are the special qualities of the Laguna landscape that influence so many urban planners to live here? And it's interesting because of the, Orange County is a real hotbed of planning and design and architecture and landscape architecture, and a lot of those people, live in Laguna Beach. And so he said, why is that? And the answer is that, Laguna Beach attracts us because it has good urban design. It has certain qualities that we appreciate, we see every day, just like you see every day. But we think of them a little bit in terms of the body of knowledge of urban design. So let's sort of define a little bit what that is. First of all, it's the integration of 3 primary things: architecture, neighborhood form, and landscape. But those are combined in a way that they result in distinctive streets, walkable neighborhoods, and memorable public spaces. And that's what we have here in Laguna Beach. So if we kind of dig a little bit deeper into what is there about Laguna Beach that constitutes good urban design, let's take that architecture, neighborhood form, and landscape and just spend a second. And this isn't just about landscape, because when you think about urban character and urban quality in a town, and that's as special as it is here in Laguna Beach, you really can't take one thing and just talk about it. These things are all working together to create a complete, a recipe of integrated visual character. And from an architectural standpoint, the Laguna has, a lot of authenticity of architecture in this town. I mean, we actually have, from our from a Western U.S. standpoint, a number of historic buildings, and you see those, you just feel them. They look different. They're not mass-produced. They're not subdivisions. They're not boxes and strip centers. They really have character, and there's a lot of historical integrity to those, and that just kind of seeps out in the character of the town. And that architectural sort of character is also somewhat eclectic in nature. I mean, you have a lot of homes that are kind of 1950s and 60s. You have a lot of newer contemporary homes, especially after the fire. And in our business district, you have these wonderful sort of eclectic pieces of architecture that every place you look, you have a different view, and every view is unique and adds interest and is somewhat entertaining. And the thing that everybody knows here is that architecture has a village scale. I don't know what else to call it, but it means that it's a scale that provides visual comfort, a sense of security to our size and the human body dimensions, that we feel comfortable and nurtured, and that 1- and 2-story scale and and the closeness of the buildings to the street provide that, and that's what constitutes this sort of village scale idea. And the second component, urban form, one of the great things about Laguna Beach is we have a variety of neighborhood types. We have sort of the lower flatland terrace grid systems, and they're not all on the same grid. They're on different grids, and they collide and create interesting sort of corners and interesting places, kinds of things that most city planners would never do today. That it's against the law to do that today, but the fact that it happened by accident, 50 years ago is one of the things that makes it great. And then we have our hillside neighborhoods, which are, work with the landscape, and they're curvilinear, and they try and work with the topography, and they were done because they kind of had to be done because we didn't have big grading equipment. We couldn't move all the hillsides. We had to work in a way that the streets, weren't too steep and worked with the topography. And then, except for, we have places like Arch Beach Heights where one system was kind of forced on the other system, which created a whole nother, kind of interesting type of neighborhood that we're still trying to figure out. Another aspect of urban form, of course, is this thing that is so distinctive and pure about Laguna Beach, which is the fact we have a village core. And we kind of take that for granted maybe, but so much of the contemporary U.S. now just doesn't have that. We have shopping centers, and we have sort of what we call suburban sprawl. And whereas in Laguna, we very clearly have a distinctive core, and we have very strong edges, definitive edges between that core and these, our lower density residential neighborhoods around that. And that really enhances the sense of place and organization and orientation within our town that we really take for granted. But, if we would really miss it if we didn't have that. And then the other thing that sort of that adds to all of that is our topography. We could have all of those other things and have it be on flat land, and it just wouldn't be the same, would it? And the topography creates this very sort of traditional, old, historic, sort of southwestern type of town, which is you have the hills. And the hills, in most cases are undeveloped because they're too hard to get to. You have the core and the downtown down at the base of the hill. Now, in this case, that base of the hill is on the ocean, but it could be on a river or it could be at a railway station. But that's a very traditional form, and we have that here, and it creates this very nurturing sort of bowl around which the downtown sits, and plus it allows for all these wonderful views we have of the ocean and of the territorial views of the town. Now, getting to landscape, because landscape is kind of the third component of that urban design combination, and you've heard about it a lot. I call it the Laguna Heritage Landscape because it's really a combination of a number of different forces that have come in over time, starting with the native landscape, which is has a number of attributes which you've heard about tonight, and then we had this sort of Australian influence with the eucalyptus, and then domestic influences. And as I was preparing for this, it's funny, you can live here 30 years and realize what you don't see, and all of a sudden I was kind of looking at the town through a landscape lens, and it's really interesting this interplay between the eucalyptus and the ficus trees. Most of the streets in the town are one of those two things in terms of the street trees, and then so there's some palms mixed in there as accents, and those, but the combination of those two give a very distinct, I think, Laguna Beach character. Also, of course, from a landscape standpoint, the wonderful work that has been done in creating the Laguna Greenbelt. It creates an entry, an open space gateway, into the town that very few towns have. And what that does is, again, accentuate the sense of place of Laguna Beach because it has edges. There's so much of Southern California, there are no edges anymore. Just it all kind of runs together, but we have edges, and I think that really, it's a very important urban design component that really helps create the Laguna character. And then it's our eclectic street character from a landscape standpoint. We have it from an architectural standpoint, but then you overlay that another layer of an eclectic landscape where there's really no two streets that are completely alike. And even on most streets, there's no two blocks that are completely alike. And so that, I think if you were a real formalist and a very kind of, academic urban designer, you'd say, well, that's not good. You need to have the streets to be, the street should all be one, street tree and one kind of approach, and this street would be another one, and that creates a framework that provides orientation and a very strong, very understandable setting and help organize the town, but this town doesn't have that. And you realize it's really a great thing because you add that to all these other attributes, and again, it's another layer of richness that we subliminally enjoy. The other second question that Greg asked was, okay, you take all of that, those urban design components. Well, what do we learn from that? If we're thinking forward rather than thinking backward, what lessons would we apply? And so I just, noted, 7 or 8 different ideas, or call them principles, that, if we were to take the best of those urban design elements and kind of carry them forward, you might consider these. And obviously, this eclectic character of the town is something we want to maintain and carry forward. So how do we do that? Well, we have design guidelines. With the design guidelines that we have should, not force a uniformity, but they should, control things we don't want to have happen, but also allow the flexibility and the freedom of design that continues forward that tradition of a variable sort of scenic landscape. And I note here that while allowing healthy evolution, we don't want to stop change. We want buildings to come. We want redevelopment to occur on properties, and that can contribute. That can be a healthy thing as long as it's done, with that following the right principles. And then, of course, from a landscape, the eclectic character is, making sure that we maintain this variety of landscape material, both evergreen and deciduous. Street trees are important, even though we have a lot of variation. These 2 pictures on the top are from the same spot on Ocean Avenue. One is looking towards the ocean, and it's a ficus street scene. You turn around, and it's a eucalyptus street scene. I never noticed that before. It's the same street, and it's like half and half exactly. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, as long as there are street trees, because street trees, I think, are important. And I know we have all kinds of issues about views and that we want to protect, and we have to do that because that's important to a lot of us. But street trees, this whole, the cycles that Bob just talked about of carbon, sequestering carbon, providing oxygen, urban heat island control, helping, organize the city, providing shade, pedestrian walkability. All of those things come from street trees. So we want to make sure that we infill those and maintain those when we can. The third idea is maintaining strong street wall. Now, street wall is kind of an urban design term, and what it means is that the buildings along a street are, historically in zoning criteria, you would have setbacks to try and push buildings back away from the street so you could have front yards and have lots of landscape. Well, in a village, the village character that we're trying to talk about here, we don't want to do that. We want to have the buildings come up tight to the street because that's what provides a great walkable pedestrian environment and that nurturing kind of human scale we were talking about. And there are key, primarily in the village, where maintaining that street wall is really important. And the example on the bottom is obviously where there's a good tight street wall, and then an example on the top is just, I just noticed a place up in on PCH, North Coast Highway there, where, that street wall is broken down. There's all kinds of things happening there that, you can just see that walking across on that side of the street is not going to be as encouraged and as comfortable as walking on the street that's along the bottom. A balance between landscape and built form. You could almost call Laguna a garden town, because there is such a richness of landscape, and there's a balance between the built form, even downtown. We have the planters, the street trees. When we get up on the hills and in the neighborhoods, we have this wonderful balance, and that's a very nurturing thing to us as people, because we come from a long history of being in a more natural environment than we are in this part of our cultural history. And so maintaining and having enough landscape space and making sure that it's used is important. We don't need to talk about this. I think that was Eric's presentation was wonderful. I almost had tears in my eyes at some of those paintings. So, how do you carry that forward? How do you continue that wonderful, plein air, character of, the eucalyptus, the barren hills in the background, the eucalyptus, punctuating, the horizon line, even the palm, every once in a while, creating an accent. I'm not sure how we do that, but we need to. The Laguna's, because we have this grid street system, we have these wonderful views, down the streets, down to the water. And so that's something that we clearly want to maintain. And we see them every day. And I don't know, what we would do to mess that up, but we want to make sure that we don't, and because that's a very unique characteristic because of the combination of the grids and the landform. We have these blue water views at the ends of the streets, and a lot of the beach communities don't have that because they don't have that combination, with the topography. So we want to even maybe look for opportunities to have more of those. The village entry, there's lots of controversy about that over the years, but just to reinforce that it is really important, and it really could be better, than it is. We've got this wonderful sequence of 3 kind of zones, especially as just looking at Laguna Canyon. You've got the open space, where open space is really dominant. Then you have this kind of transitional entry as you're coming in, up to the festival, and then you have the town itself that then opens onto this wonderful, explosion of the ocean, as you come down to PCH. And, we need to just recognize the importance of that and think about, how do we make that better, especially kind of that middle zone, which clearly needs some landscape renovation. And I know there's lots of energy spent on talking about that. And then lastly, and we've heard this, consider the ecological landscape values. And Bob talked about kind of one dimension of that, which is measuring the energy in the natural landscape to help gauge how efficient we are in our human activities. But there are lots of other ways, and it's a 2-hour discussion just on this to get into it. But you can see there's everything from community agriculture, carbon sequestration, integrated habitats, urban drainage. All of these things are part of a really robust integrated landscape management approach to a community. And they can all be measured, they can all be quantified, they can all be guided. And when you get done, you just end up with just a much more balanced kind of relationship to the landscape. And the landscape starts to pay us back. And it sounds a little mercenary, but I mean, when you increase, well, let me go on to the next and talk about it. The last question is, how could sustainability modeling apply to Laguna? And all of those things on that diagram, can be modeled and quantified. It doesn't have to be just theory. For instance, just taking a couple things, for example, carbon sequestration. I'm not sure where the city is in terms of AB 32, compliance and a climate action plan and all those kinds of things. But we've done a lot of work in those areas and found that, the landscape can be an important player in offsetting other types of measures that might have to be considered to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. If we can, plant the right plants, plant robustly in a way consistent with other guidelines, we can actually measure that, get credit for that, and it actually can monetize that in terms of savings of much more expensive technological means of reducing carbon. The diagrams on the bottom just kind of show, kind of a very conventional kind of landscape in a neighborhood, and then on the right, there's a much more sort of carbon sequestration focused landscape, which does a lot more. And you can see some numbers here that you can see the range of tons of carbon annually that can be sequestered by a community by different landscape techniques. Biodiversity, haven't really talked about that too much tonight. We've obviously talked about a number of ecological components, but thinking about landscape at a community scale in terms of biodiversity and how can we create healthy genetic populations, genetic population movement through the city. These are things that can be thought about and can be put in guidelines and create a more sustainable and healthy and more resilient landscape by focusing on biodiversity. And the last thing is what's called green infrastructure. And it doesn't mean it's green sewer lines. It means that the ecological and open space system is thought of as an infrastructure system. with connectivity and with hubs and with centers and that all link together, and it's not just great for animals and habitat and wildlife. Is great for people too, because this becomes a trail system opportunity that can connect up further up into the the open space and create inland to ocean waterfront connectivity. And so it's there's a science to this, but it's it's something that given the valleys and the canyons that Eric talked about and our green belt, we have a unique opportunity to build on that concept. So.
Steve, thank you very much. Before you leave, could you hand me those 2 books on the... I need to plug them. Thank you, all panelists. We're going to get into discussion now. We don't have as much time as we expected. I had this harebrained idea that we could encompass all of this discussion into 8-minute segments. You can't put lightning in a bottle, and I think in this case, I think that's a good thing. I just want to take a very brief moment, and I'm going to turn it to Eric before he collapses into his sick bed. Just some takeaways on this. There are really 4 different, I think, elements that I came away with. There's the importance of the entire natural landscape, the geology, the biology, the biological context that we sit in is truly amazing. The culture that we have is really valued worldwide. We live with it every day. Sometimes we don't realize just what we have. The fire management discussion has really, I think, is opening our minds to some more subtle approaches and more comprehensive approaches to managing our fire safety while taking care of our habitat. And I think most importantly, the ability to start to measure what we mean if we want to be a sustainable community. That is now in our grasp. We've got the tools to do it now. The thought processes, things have gotten more complicated, but they've gotten more simple. I think we're on the cusp of doing something here. So we've learned a lot, and this reminds me of a great saying by Jacques Cousteau. He said, "People protect what they love." And by knowing just that much more about what we have, we can protect it, and we can even love it and appreciate it even more. So with that, I'd like to turn to the questions. We don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to start with Eric with the overall question. And basically is that we're looking to develop this element that encompasses integrated landscape management. I think you're all beginning to get a sense of what that means. For Eric, from your standpoint, with the arts and culture and all that, what are the most important aspects to you, and how might we achieve that in the element?
Well, the examples that I gave in the paintings tell us what we can do about landscaping in the future to keep Laguna as a place that continues to inspire and be a link with nature. Namely, preserve our landscape and trees, respect the topography, and continue to plant a broad diversity of climate-suitable species so that Laguna retains that special character, distinctly different from the surrounding planned communities. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here a little bit. We need a more comprehensive and systematic landscape beautification program, the full length of Coast Boulevard from Irvine Cove all the way to Three Arch Bay. As we move from one neighborhood to the next, they don't all have to be the same species as discussed before. We need to revert the canyon floor back to the California sycamore, backed up by the coast live oaks behind them up on the slopes. And finally, we need policies fostering vegetation maintenance, in particular frequent tree lacing, like the Montage. You see them do it. They're endlessly lacing the trees at the Montage. It's a good example to help address the controversial view preservation issue that's going on in town, and also gives more light rather than darkness. So that's pretty much it. That's what I think.
Eric, thank you.
Yeah.
You may be excused if you so desire.
The air conditioning is just mad.
All right. Thank you for for coming out when you're not feeling that great. All right, given the time and just the way things are flowing, I'm gonna mix things up just a little bit and focus on the specific questions to each of the panelists, and we can tie back into the general question of integrated landscape management. To Jamie, Laguna Beach has a lot of laws and regulations on the book in relation to geomorphology and geologic protection. I'm wondering what additional things we should be thinking about. And for example, we were talking about the notion that given the geology of Laguna, all the strata tends to dip or strike or whatever it does in a sort of a southerly, southeasterly direction, which means that the south-facing slopes of the community, which you see all over the place, are the ones that are most prone to instability. Should we be looking at more specific things like that in terms of coming up with policies for the general plan, which would be on a general level, but are we missing things when it comes to landform stability that we're not already addressing? And if the answer is no, that makes our job easy.
Yeah, well, really, from my geologic perspective, the two things that we can do as a community is talk about drought-resistant plants and things that we don't have to introduce water into the slopes, which I think we're attempting to do that already. And another big issue is site drainage for any new development or big remodels. That's a big part. The grading plans, where this water is going, we need to be directing all of our water onto the streets, into the appropriate drainage devices. We have systems that take care of that, but if we allow them to go into the ground and over the slopes, it just exacerbates. But there are just areas, and like I said when I spoke, there's just some things that we have to accept as geologic risks living where we do. But taking those two things into account from a geologic perspective, we need to be doing every time we develop or remodel or redesign.
Great, thank you very much. To Trish, from the standpoint of habitat management, what should we be doing? What should we be putting into the landscape element that maybe we haven't thought about? And one of the things that we did is, and I really want to point this out, is that our neighborhoods map, the previous neighborhoods map just had the neighborhoods. This neighborhood map has all of the open space and everything else. Again, the concept of integrated landscape management.
One thing I was thinking about is
One thing I was thinking about is you have a neighborhood map. It might be helpful to have a natural landscape map that really, there's elements of it in the general plan, but really identify the features of particular areas such as the different segments of Laguna Canyon, as well as the ridge lines and their biological value and what they contribute to the general plan and the scenic and landscape plan. So really kind of getting into the dirt and the weeds on what these natural communities provide in terms of scenic and other benefits to the community. So getting a more categorization of our natural landscape might be something.
Let me ask a follow-on question that deals with the urban landscape as habitat. The natural landscape is habitat. Nature figured that out millennia ago. From a standpoint of the urban ornamental landscape, what might we be looking at in terms of looking for opportunities that would provide for compatible wildlife habitat? Doesn't mean the raccoons are in your pantry every night.
I think Bob Perry really hit on this one, and that's creating a structure in our human landscapes. Doesn't all have to be native, because our non-native trees, many of them from Mediterranean regions, have biological values for birds in particular. So creating structure in our landscapes is something that also creates friendly wildlife habitat, and incorporating native plants that are adaptable to human communities are another feature too, of course. But any kind of structure is definitely great for wildlife. They don't like just trees and a shrub. They like understory, shrubs, mid-layer, and then trees.
So that would be a benefit.
These are all the principles of landscape architectural planting design. So it works together. Thank you for that. To Rick Halsey, you brought up some pretty compelling arguments tonight about some of our thinking about trees and what really burns and what doesn't burn. From what you know about what we have on the books, and I don't expect that you've read everything, what should we be looking at most specifically in this element? And I'm particularly thinking about the whole notion that the whole city, almost the whole city, is a very severe, very high fire hazard severity zone. Those kinds of designations, the fire department's target species list and all of that, where do we need to tweak things, advance things, keep things the same? What's your general sense?
Well, I think what I was saying by focusing on the house, I just don't think trees are an issue here.
Is your microphone on?
No.
Thank you.
I don't think trees and the way the area is landscaped is really an issue. I would hazard a guess in some of the fires you've had here, you would, if you take a look at photographs and whatnot, you'll see charred homes and all the landscape around the house, including the trees, is green, except the trees that got burned by the house. It's not the other way around. So you have to look at it backwards in the way we usually look at it. The most volatile fuel is the home. And so the direction of the ordinances need to look at that and then really incorporate the idea of what is flammable and what is not. So I hesitate to have ordinances focus on vegetation because it's not really the issue a lot of times. The only one thing I will say is palm trees. It's really a problem. I mean, these things come off when these Santa Ana winds hit, and they're like flying dinner plates that crash into things and they ignite homes. So, I mean, that's one tree that I've really had a problem with as a firefighter. But for the most part, you look at the vegetation because it's easier than asking somebody to fix their roof. And that's really why it's there. It's not necessarily it works, it's just politically more viable. Mm-hmm. However, FEMA's got this great program now that help people, that'll allow you to get subsidies to get, ember resistant vents, change out your roofs, that kind of stuff. So it's moving in that direction, but does that help? Okay.
That's very helpful. There's one other question I was going to ask you, but it's escaping me at the moment. So I'm going to turn to Bob, and this sort of ties in with what Steve is doing now. The notion of the sustainability metrics that we now seem to, after all these years, have finally gotten our arms around, or we're starting to. And you made the really startling comment about just how far away we are from a sustainable landscape. We've got a built-out community with its culture, with its habits and all of that, but I think a community that really wants to be sustainable wants to figure out what that really means. What would you suggest from the standpoint of the general planning work that we might put into the policies that would allow us to start doing that modeling, to start measuring what we have, checking the cost benefits, and then making decisions on that? And that's a question I'm asking really both of you.
Well, I think you answered part of the question. My suggestion is to start to record and measure the amount of water use you have in your landscape, amount of fossil fuel use. You go out and you survey different areas and you estimate the standing biomass and look at the benefit of the landscape from the standpoint of embodied energy, sequestered carbon, and released oxygen. And you basically collect the data in which to then start to see more clearly the scope of the challenge. Ultimately, I think it can lead to suggesting guidelines like LEEDS program, where you can say that we advocate landscapes that produce a certain amount of biomass and diversity and complementary qualities to the natural environment where appropriate or the urban environment. But you build your benefits and you look at the energy costs, carbon costs that go into producing those benefits, and you look for a certain standard of performance. So you use some of the other conventions we're we're already applying to these resource issues.
Thank you. Steve, I think that's a perfect segue for you. Steve has been involved for a number of years in putting together a sustainability simulation model that covers just about everything from what I can tell, from what Bob's talking about to economics, to cultural values, to fiscal aspects. It's an amazing piece of work. A lot of it has been applied to master planning of new communities, helping people make decisions about different kinds of development strategies, particularly some of the financial models that developers have to look at, but also the community models of the kinds of things we're talking about. What do you think we might be able to do here in Laguna Beach to really, for once in a while, measure what we have, decide what's important to us, and then be able to actually implement it and kind of get landscape and landscape architecture out of what I'm going to call sort of the romantic, subjective, gauzy, fuzzy mode where it all sounds good, it all feels good, but you need to nail it down.
Well, I think I would agree with Trish that you start by figuring out what you have, and doing some mapping of the city, from, looking at it from a couple of different dimensions, because we have different ecotones, here based on the elevation above the water, based on the aspect, based on whether it's in a canyon bottom or a hilltop. All of those suggest different microenvironments for different types of plant species and plant families. And kind of understanding what wants to grow here would be a good thing. And then also in understanding what we have here, just doing some, it could just be aerial photography type inventorying and mapping, and then once we kind of know what we have, starting to look at what are the policy linkages that we might want to create. Like, for instance, I mentioned, greenhouse gas, emissions reduction, programs. Well, as I mentioned, landscape can play a large part of that, as well as, all of the fossil fuel use and everything associated with it. Once we know what we have and once we know what the goals are from a policy standpoint, you can start to, link together those two things and actually come up with some objectives, that are measurable, and you can track them over a 10, 20, 30-year, time frame and try and achieve those. Water quality is a very measurable component, and there's a huge movement, of course, towards less central. We talked about get the water concentrated and get it out from a geological standpoint. From a water quality standpoint, we're going just the other direction, which is to try and decentralize it and try and reduce the amount that, or at least treat it, before it goes in, and the landscape can have a big part of that, and that's very measurable. We did some work for the city of Ventura, where and it was the first time we actually did it on an existing community, where we took transportation, we took building energy, we took water consumption, we took existing landscape character, and put it all together into an integrated model and sort of toyed around with what combinations of measures and how aggressive certain measures could be to have the biggest impact on greenhouse gas reduction. And it's, there's some work associated with that, but they got